Welcome back, everybody, to our afternoon session of our Blockchain for Europe Summit. Before I hand over to our moderator, Lavan, I would like to just ask you to also please use our hashtag BC4EU Summit 2021 in case you're also on social media or tweet. And we would highly welcome that. In parallel, I hope you had a good lunch, and would like to hand over now to Lavan to our next panel on blockchain and AI convergence. Lavan, panel is yours.
Thank you, Robert, and good afternoon and welcome to this Blockchain for Europe Summit 2021 panel discussion on the convergence of blockchain and artificial intelligence, transforming the industry. My name is Lavan Tasradakumar. I am the EMEA Director of Regulatory Affairs at Global Digital Finance, which is a global membership organization that advocates and accelerates the adoption of best practices for digital assets. I'm delighted to have been asked to moderate this panel here today, as I think it's an important discussion and one that doesn't get as much airtime as I think it should. Not just because it scores highly in buzzword bingo, and in fact, I think we just need to add 5G and IoT and we're there, but AI and blockchain are quite often discussed in isolation. And as I'm sure we'll hear today in the discussion to come, there are some fantastic opportunities when these technologies combine. And it's also important that we realize this and create the right environment to accelerate the adoption of it. Time permitting, today I'm looking to address three areas in particular. That's market evolution and use cases, policy and regulation, and skills, talents, and investment. That being said, I'm keen to make this discussion as interactive as possible. So if any of the audience have any comments or questions, please do put them in the chat box and I'll try and incorporate them as best I can into the discussion. So without further ado, I'll introduce my panel. We have got Lucas Roper, Policy Officer for Blockchain at DG Connect at the European Commission. We have Humayun Sheikh, CEO at Fetch AI. We've got Eduard Grun, DLT lead at Festo, and we've got Alexandra Brintrup, lecturer at the University of Cambridge. Thank you for joining the panel here today. No pressure to the panelists, but before this panel, I was speaking to Robert, who also mentioned that the panels had been of such high quality that he would watch them in the cinema. So I've no doubt that he'll be buying a ticket for our one as well. So best of luck. Right, so let's kick this off. Perhaps Lucas, if I can come over to you first, can you give us a brief introduction into what is happening in this industry through your lens at the Commission? I know you've got a particular focus on this through your work at DG Connect.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting the European Commission DG Connect to this great panel. I can only agree that we have really top speakers. I'm looking forward to the discussion. So from the European Commission DG Connect's perspective, this topic of convergence is a topic that we have been following over the last 3 years with increasing interest. As data are increasing through the Internet of Things, through the sensors that are being attached to the things and to machines becoming more autonomous in their thinking, as these data are increasing, we need to find ways how to interpret the data and how to make sure that the data are safe and are not corrupted. And that really brings these technologies of artificial intelligence and blockchain very well together. They are very complementary if you think of it. If you call data today the raw oil of our economy, the new raw oil, then you need a refinery to clean them. And these are the algorithms of machine learning and artificial intelligence. But the best refinery can only work well if the oil arrives at the refinery in a safe way. And this is where the pipeline comes in. And I would refer to blockchain as the pipeline for safely transferring and transporting the data to the refinery. The blockchain technology has evolved significantly since it was created in 2008 for the Bitcoin cryptocurrency. It is today a general purpose technology that is being found in almost all verticals of our economy. And it has become a real trust machine. a technology to create trust in the immutability of the data, a technology to ensure the data cannot be corrupted once they have been time-stamped and uploaded. And why is that so important? Well, if you realize that our internet is today evolving towards edge computing, where data will be created on the edges, where data will come from cars, autonomous machines, all these data are very much dispersed. And in bringing the machine learning algorithms of artificial intelligence to this data, or the other way around, the data to the machine learning algorithm, you need to have this safe pipeline. And that's where blockchain comes in. So the convergence is something that we see happening over the next 5 years. It's not a long-term process. It's something that's happening now, that is happening along our supply chains. It's happening in our car industries. And I'm happy to give a few examples. If you think of autonomous cars becoming a reality in the next 10 years, these cars that will drive themselves will autonomously take decisions. They will take autonomous decisions where to charge electricity, where they can charge fastest, where they can charge for the lowest price, and they will feed from data that come from the Internet of Things. They need to pay for the electricity. That's where blockchain will come in. Blockchain allows you to pay with digital assets and smart contracts in a fully autonomous way. The artificial intelligence will allow the cars to choose where they drive to, how they drive, and the blockchain will record this for regulatory purposes. So the machine industry in the automobile sector, I think, is a very good example for where the convergence will really have a big impact. But we can already look at live examples in the financial industry today. The financial industry has been very much digital already over the last 10 years, and artificial intelligence is known in capital markets very well since the 1990s. So today in this sector, which is particularly advanced when it comes to machine learning, we see that blockchain is really at the forefront of deployment. We see blockchain in securities trading, we see blockchain in money remittance cases, payment cases, even insurance. So this convergence is not something hypothetical. It's something that is happening today. It's something that's happening gradually. And we expect this to happen over 5 years in accelerated speed. How are we in DG Connect reacting to this? Well, for instance, we have reacted to this by setting up investment funds that jointly support artificial intelligence and blockchain. The Artificial Intelligence and Blockchain Fund that we have set up last year provides risk capital to startups and scale-ups that want to deploy specifically use cases in the area of artificial intelligence and blockchain, ideally combined. So we're really trying to push this development and to make Europe a leader in this space and to benefit from the convergence of the technologies. Now, the challenges that we face for this convergence of the technologies is challenges that are related to the technologies themselves, but also challenges that are related to our regulatory frameworks. In particular, for blockchain, we must be realistic and realize that a lot of the data-related regulations we have been writing over the last decade, in particular on data protection, we're looking at very centralized data solutions where data were controlled by one party only. The solutions that are proposed in these regulations sometimes need interpretation in a pragmatic way that they fit a fully decentralized setup. And for artificial intelligence, you know that we're in the prospect of adopting a regulation. We've made a proposal to bring some ethics into the use of artificial intelligence. So it's this combination of regulatory push and of technology development that really make us make most of this convergence of technologies. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'm glad to discuss this further with my other panelists.
Thank you, Lucas. No, I think that was very interesting. In particular, I'm interested in pulling out later in the discussion around the comments you made on how blockchain, it could be used as a record for regulatory purposes, and then the comments you made about the GDPR based on a centralized model, what we do in a decentralized sense. So we'll certainly come back to that. But if we go over to Humayun, if I come over to you next, it'd be great to hear what Fetch are doing in this space and how you're seeing this convergence takes place, perhaps some examples of industrial use cases that you're seeing as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think Lucas gave us a very comprehensive overview. I would just like to add a couple of things in that, and I think they're just addition rather than kind of a disagreement or something. One thing which is quite important in this use case, and you see that with any technological adoption, is how do you build the business case around it? How do people make money? And I'm just putting it in a very simple and a very crude way. How do people make money? If people don't make money, you don't get adoption. We know this needs to we need to bring this to the market, but that portion cannot be ignored. And then the other issue we have, which is, again, it's not an issue, but it needs to be dealt with, is all the data that you're generating and all the data that needs storage when you move it, and just moving the data across is a big problem, because it's going to be resource heavy. It's going to need a continuous connectivity. It's going to need high bandwidth. So can we find a way to overcome that? And that's really where, just leading into where Fetch sits. Fetch is sitting, as exactly Lucas said, we're building the pipeline. We're building the pipeline where you can connect these machines, these, I would call them stakeholders, because in the new digital autonomous world, you'll have stakeholders, and machines will also be stakeholders, even if they're autonomous. It could be autonomous cars, it could be autonomous 3D printers. What you need to then give them is the ability of managing their own funding, the ability for them to actually make money from it for the investor and the stakeholder who has invested in the equipment. They might already be financed by themselves. So we're creating that framework for the business model, and we're also creating the architecture where you can train these algorithms on privacy preserving compute without compromising the privacy of the data or the data owner, and using that to train the machine learning AI models, which actually create this autonomy. And that's really, we feel, again, over the next 5 to 10 years, once all this, this hype about just making payments over blockchain will calm down a little bit, and then people will start to realize that, yes, there is other applications to this whole industry, which again, why we're here, because we think distributed ledger technology is something which can not just help payments, but it can also help bring AI, machine learning to, and make it very usable and bring it to all the machines which are out there. So, so what we're building reduces the need for you having all the knowledge base. You don't need to be an expert in machine learning. You can just plug and play. And there are models which people can fund. I mean, the way I see it is this new economy, which is the digital economy. This is the, you can call it tokenized economy, you can call it crypto economy, whatever you want to give the name to it, is going to be very granular. And all these machines will have their own economic decision-making to do. And unless you enable that, you will not see true decentralization. And what that brings us back again to the same discussion: who owns the data? Where does the data reside? What is the GDPR issues? And we need to overcome that in the regulatory sense as well. And then create a model which is, the economic model is quite important here. Where does the consensus come from when things are done? Who gets the profitability out of it? And how do you train these machine learning algorithms? And are you taking care of all the discriminatory elements which go into machine learning? So all of that can actually, one of the best solutions we think that could come from it is by combining decentralized ledger technology and AI and machine learning. So that's my kind of view on that.
Thank you very much, Ami. And Edouard, what are your thoughts on this, specifically looking at I know that you're specifically looking at the supply chain on this, but what are the benefits of convergence that you see? Eduard, I think you're on mute.
So yeah, we are as Festor one of those hidden champions in production. So anytime you go to a production line and look into what is used there, you will find some of our devices there. And that means we are on a really unique position here, because we are not only part of the machine, but of the whole ecosystem a production line works on. So when a product gets produced, you have to get your resources from somewhere, then produce the stuff and build it. And so that's something blockchain could help really much in having the supply chain made more transparent by a blockchain solution. And also what Humayun also talked about is like having a machine, inter-machine economy, where different machines could barter or trade with each other to get a product produced. So today we have big departments looking after the supply chain of the different companies so that everything runs smooth through your production line. And I think that's a really great opportunity here to have blockchain and AI combined to find an optimum for your product, so that you may produce it not only in your own plant, but also use different factories, because you could share data for production of this product with other manufacturers. And so we could transform our current production system from a push market, where manufacturers produce something and then hope that somebody will buy the stuff waiting in the shops, to a pull market where stuff gets only produced when there is really need for it. So I think that would be a solution also for our economic or ecologic problems we have right now.
That's interesting. I think. Thank you. And I'm certainly quite interested in the marketplace comment that you had made there, and I think that's something that we'll certainly come back to. But first, Alexandra, if I come over to you next to just give us some insights into some of the things you're working on here in the context of AI and blockchain and the opportunities you see.
Hi, Lewan, and hi, everybody. So my main specialization is AI in supply chains, right? So groups of interconnected companies who might not even know that they are working together, but they are dependent on one another. So so this has been really realized since a very long time in supply chain management, but that decentralized nature of supply chains, that hasn't really been something that was very much addressed in the past. So I guess what really excites me about blockchain is the coupling of AI with it. So generally, when people talk about supply chains and blockchain, the very first that people think about is supply chain traceability, because supply chain visibility and being able to trace where stuff comes from is very important, as we have seen in the COVID pandemic, when we ran into huge problems because organizations knew, of course, whom they are buying stuff from, but didn't know whom those people were buying stuff from. So when any one member of the chain is disrupted, then that disruption quickly ripples through the chain. So given that blockchain is a secure ledger where transactions can be stored and validated without the need for a central orchestrator, then it could be used to keep a safe record to validate and understand where things are coming from. So that's kind of the blockchain aspect of why it's interesting from a supply chain perspective. But an even more exciting potential, I think, comes from the convergence effect that Lucas was talking about before. So because that enables new applications. So for instance, about 10 years ago, we had a research project with one of a major aerospace manufacturing company who was spending a very long time for trying to deal with ordering components for different aircraft types that are kind of predictable issues that can happen during the aircraft's lifetime. So the idea was that could we kind of create an autonomous system where suppliers and buyers are represented by software agents, so autonomous software, and they exchange smart contracts with one another. And that idea sort of was around since 10 years, but the technology, the AI technology was there, but that coupling with blockchain is really, I think, is now what's going to really enable this application in real life. And similarly, an example that the marketplace example that Edward was talking about earlier. It's this concept of distributed manufacturing, where companies can lease excess capacity for low volume production, and thus they need to form ad hoc supply chains. Without automation, which can be enabled by a coupling of AI software with blockchain, this wouldn't really be possible in real life because organizations would have to spend an enormous amount of time orchestrating ad hoc supply chain formation, and just the value that they gain from that wouldn't outweigh the transaction costs that come from that manual orchestration. So if we enabled a coupling of blockchain, so a smart contracting mechanism with an autonomous capability, then that creates another use case that kind of, I think, shifts fundamentally the way that we can work in supply chains. So those are my, I guess, initial thoughts. Blockchain itself is very useful from a traceability perspective for supply chains, but it enables new applications, new business models when it's coupled with AI.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I'm quite interested to pull on one of the things that you said before, and it was a theme that Humayun had also brought up as well around bias. So one of the things that jumps out to me here is, or one of the things that we've obviously got to safeguard in AI is that of bias, conscious or unconscious. Does in the convergence of blockchain and AI here, is that addressed? Because I mean, on one hand, it seems like, yes, you've got the kind of traceability aspect of the blockchain, but then also is there can this truly be done and mitigated when in a truly decentralized model? Alexandra, sorry, that's perhaps you first, and then I don't know, was someone about to jump in?
I can quickly just give a little bit of my view, but please come in. What we can hope for in the beginning, when this is all kicking off, is that you can enable participants to come into this system, and you don't create this barrier to entry. And I mean, that's obviously the first step to kind of start removing that bias. And to enable that, what you need to do is you should not have the models, the machine learning models, the AI models, sitting in some big centralized control, either a government, either a company, or even a medium-sized corporation, because that automatically creates bias. Now, if you enable this model to be trained, and I'm simplifying, I'm oversimplifying perhaps a little bit, but I just want to get my point across. It's reducing that barrier to entry. It's enabling people to bring their data, bring their bias into the system, which is what makes it then equal. So if you enable that, I think you have taken your first step into creating, a much more fair machine learning model.
Yeah, I want to add, even when you go into a machine, there are different parts of or devices from different manufacturers which are all interested in getting their data back to build better products out of it. And that's also a use case for blockchain where you have one machine producing data, but many different recipients for this data and many different use cases to use this data, which could be employed here too.
I might also, I guess, give a small insight into this. So algorithms, they end up mimicking, if we want them to, human behavior and decision-making patterns. So, and we, I guess, need to question whether we want them to, depending on the context that we are in. So again, giving an example around supply chains, let's say that I want to make use of data that's on the blockchain on previous transactions to predict a supplier's performance, right? So when we have done this in the past in our own research group, what we realized is that those transactions, typically from a company, they follow what we call an exponential degree distribution. So meaning that there are exponentially more orders that are given to certain suppliers than others. So what that then means is that data on certain suppliers is going to be a lot more than others, right? So, so if we were to kind of train an algorithm that kind of favors larger data sets coming, because then that increases our confidence on whether a supplier is going to be highly performant or not, then that algorithm is going to possibly prefer the one that the supplier that we have more data on. So that over time can create a kind of rich gets richer phenomenon, right? But this is real life as well. So procurement officers in a company, they would remember the supplier that they deal with most. So, we need to question whether we want that kind of bias to be replicated in the algorithms that we are generating when we automate things.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing actually that also came to mind in the comment that you made there, and sorry to keep on this kind of point, but I think it's quite interesting and important. But one of the aspects of AI is obviously the explainability. Now, to what extent is that improved in this coupling with distributed ledger technology? Is, to me, it could lead to a situation where one of two ways. It could even become even more incomprehensible as to the decision because of the kind of volume of the data sets. But then there's also that traceability allows you to be able to map that. What would we say there?
That's a very interesting point there. So again, just working through an example, if we were to look at supplier performance again, or delays of certain orders, right? If we were looking at just a delay starting to happen from a certain connection that we have a relationship with. Now, normally that's our first viewpoint as a buyer. So we would just be thinking that supplier is delayed. But if we actually were able to trace back the source of that delay, then perhaps the delay is coming to us from somewhere downstream or somewhere upstream, which we wouldn't have been able to pinpoint before. So that's one thing. So it helps from that point. But you're right, Levan. I think it also, given that we now have a decentralized perspective of things, it makes explainability more difficult as well in some cases because we don't have access to all the data. We cannot reverse engineer a prediction. We don't really know, because we don't have one source of single truth there.
Thank you. No, that makes sense.
Yeah,
sorry.
There is we've been working on a consensus design which enables algorithms to be trained based on a kind of a voting, automated voting mechanism, or it could be manual. But we feel that it could improve explainability quite considerably. But again, this is such a new technique, it's such a new technology, we'll have to just trial. It's a trial and error situation, and we'll see more and more of that. But if you think of a machine learning algorithm, and again, I'm oversimplifying, but I think it gives you some perspective. If you're training a machine learning algorithm on a data set and the machine learning results come out, you have this consensus mechanism which either chooses those results or rejects those results. Now, that step alone is improving because it's recorded. It improves, explainability, because you look at which data set, what kind of data weights came along, where did they come from, how did they affect the model improvement, or they reduce the model improvement. And then you can actually record it. So when you go back, you can see if a decision was made, these are the things which changed in the past. So in principle, and up till now, we have no reason to believe, because we have seen and we have that already working, so we can show that. It seems to be a much more improved way of explainability, and we can record it, and it's auditable.
Thank you, Humayun. Lucas, if I can come to you. Sorry, I saw you put your hand up, but it didn't get to
Let the industry experts speak about technology. That's much more interesting than a commission official. That's okay. No, I just wanted absolutely to concur with what my co-panelists have said. I think that as data will be more decentralized naturally, this is a development that's going to happen anyway. We will have the data on the edge. We will need to use federated machine learning. Whether we want it or not, we'll have to use that. So once you think about such a decentralized setup for training machine learning algorithms, it just comes naturally to use the blockchain not only for verifying that the data are not corrupted and changed, but also using the blockchain to record the training process of the machine learning algorithm. And as Humayun said, I think that will create a transparency which we just don't have today, where you're training the machine learning algorithms within one company, in one IT department, by a small handful of people who might be a very homogeneous group. And then you have the problems of the bias. Whereas if you train it with a large number of people and record that training process on a blockchain, you have the transparency. So I would rather say that the effect of decentralization and of recording on the blockchain, it can actually dramatically increase transparency, and through transparency help us address bias to some extent.
Thank you. And I think I agree. I think that's a very interesting point. Before we come back to you, Lucas, on some of the kind of policy and regulatory initiatives from the Commission, and just one thing that also had come up in the opening statements was that of decentralized market spaces. And I guess the question that I have here is, I can see on the one side, we've got a situation where it helps companies with that accessibility to and kind of enter into the market. But also there are surely players here that are kind of disincentivized towards this and are kind of more in favor of having this kind of centralized platform where they're doing things, and perhaps also maybe not running the risk of I don't know, releasing trade secrets by kind of having a distributed manufacturing model. Is that a concern that anyone has come across or has?
Well, that's the biggest showstopper right now. Why bigger companies, why industry would be hesitant to adopt any new model, any such decentralized model. And that brings me back to two similar points which I made in the past. One is, can you create a low barrier to entry? So smaller companies, medium-sized companies don't incur that technical debt that they need to kind of have. And they can just plug into a system and actually it makes financial sense. So till it makes financial sense, this will not be adopted by the industry because the whole objective is to make money. And if you're talking about a business is not, apart from the charities, business is not there to lose money. Business is there to be profitable. Now, by its very nature, if you ignore that element, then adoption will be very difficult. And I think that is one key point at the moment, which I'm focusing on, my team is focusing on, is how do you create adoption? How do you make it financially viable for companies to do it? And that in itself solves that problem. It doesn't fully solve the problem, but it does solve the problem, because the whole point of a business is to kind of create this. I mean, the ultimate objective of business perhaps is to create this monopoly where they can dictate the price. But now, if you're changing that, the businesses are not going to like that. But if you give them an alternative model where they could equally benefit, then you can see that transition.
Absolutely, Alexandra.
Just, I guess, echoing Humayun's comments there. Centralization is convenient. So, one party is responsible for maintaining a system. That party is able to analyze all the data. On the other hand, centralization over time results in kind of platform economies where suppliers, especially SMEs, go towards a race to the bottom, as Edward one time mentioned to me. So, and end up competing. So, decentralization, I guess, is really important to overcome negative aspects of those types of platforms, and it's blockchain presents a tremendous opportunity there for us. So I guess one issue there is, as Humayun also mentioned, is skills and ease of access to technology. So in the UK, for example, right, so about 80% of supply chains are consisting of SMEs. And many of these SMEs, they don't have the necessary IT skills all the time to access to decentralized digital technology. So one needs to create easily pluggable solutions to existing ERP systems, for example, or other legacy systems. So standards are very important there to sort of create easy to access technology. And in supply chains, it's particularly important because unless everyone or many of the supply chain members get on board, then everyone won't see the benefits. So it's a bit of a cyclical problem, this.
Yeah. Absolutely, I think that's a good point. And I'm keen to also get onto the skills comment shortly later on in this discussion. And I'm conscious as well that the words of interoperability and standards are coming up, which is probably a cue to bring Lucas in. But before that, if I go over to Edward, I know you had your hand up. Yeah,
well, I wanted to add also what Alexandra also talked about. So what is an alternative to get an adoption to an decentralized system? So that's using a centralized system, and we all have seen what the platform economies leads to. And the question is, do we want this? So as we see in manufacturing, there are establishing a couple of companies are establishing as a central supply chain solution. So where you could order your parts with a simple click, like uploading your CAD file, and they will do everything for you. But yeah, I'm not sure if I, as a manufacturer, do want this, because as you mentioned, he could get insight in my trade secrets, how stuff is produced for my products, and so he could outrun me at some point. On the other hand, I as a producer have the problem. I don't know how often I will sell my product. So when I develop a new product, I could do a best guess, but this means I could be off like 20%, but maybe also be off like 60%. So in my point of view, one could only benefit from having a decentralized marketplace and using such systems to streamline one's supply chain. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thanks for that. And Lucas, if I come over to you, I think this would be a good time to kind of hear about what the Commission are doing in this space from a policy and regulatory perspective. So it's been mentioned already about the kind of need, especially in the supply chain sense, to have these standards in place. What are the Commission doing in this?
Certainly, thank you very much. It's a good question. I think when we talk about standards in particular for blockchain technology, the European Commission is promoting what we call a gold standard for distributed ledger technologies. Those should be technologies that are sustainable. Sustainability is very important, number one. They should be technologies that are scalable, and they should be technologies that comply with our key regulatory requirements around data protection, about the eIDAS regulation and other regulations in that sense. So there are a number of policy initiatives which we take in order to encourage that and to accelerate that. There are a number of standardization initiatives that we're also encouraging. On the policy initiatives, one of the very first things we've done in the European Union is we have built an alliance of member states around what we call the European Blockchain Partnership, which today has 27 EU member states, Norway and Liechtenstein. And together with them, we are not only talking about blockchain, we are building a blockchain, namely we are building the European Blockchain Services infrastructure. And this infrastructure is a kind of a test bed and an innovation facility for us policymakers to promote common standards, to develop the gold standard together. And we meet in quarterly meetings and we meet in weekly meetings at a technical level. So this work has allowed us to build a backbone blockchain infrastructure for the public service, which should later then be scalable and operational, interoperational with private solutions, offering capacity also for private players, for instance, for supply chain use cases. This infrastructure is now in the pilot phase. It's entering the pilot, and it should be operational in the second half of the year. Now, when we look more at the regulatory standard setting part of our work, I think what type of standards do we need for distributed ledger technologies to be successful? Well, first of all, we need to have a standard for digital identity for people. If you don't know who is the person on the other side, it's very hard to do business with them in the internet, in decentralization. And here, our recent eIDAS regulatory proposal of the 3rd of June should be mentioned. We have for the first time put on the table a proposal for European eID, and that proposal is based also on the idea of self-sovereignty. And what other technology than blockchain would be better suited to offer self-sovereignty? So that is definitely a step into this direction to create one standard for the EU eID that can build on self-sovereignty. And then if we talk about distributed ledger technologies as such, we have such a broad panoply of different technologies today, so that for the enterprises, for companies at the C level, it's difficult to make the right decision. So when can you trust one technology above another one? And this is something where we would like to work with the industry to develop a minimum set of binding standards as of which you can say a certain distributed ledger is trustworthy. And that's why equally in the latest legislative proposal of the 3rd of June, we have for the first time put forward a proposal to create a trust service for electronic ledgers, which would also apply to distributed ledger technologies. So this proposal has now been sent to Parliament and Council and will be discussed in the legislative process. When we talk about technical standards, what we're doing here as European Commission is that we are present at ISO TC307, we are present at IEEE, ETSI, Sensenelec, ITUT, and all the standard setting bodies that talk blockchain. And we work with the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, which is promoting standardization blockchain closely to accelerate that. So on the supply chain specific issue, I think the comments of Alexandra were absolutely spot on. We have different supply chain solutions on blockchain, and we have a lot of SMEs that are there. What we really need to achieve together is to make distributed ledger technologies more user-friendly, easy to use, so that also the SMEs can more easily integrate them into their supply chains.
Thank you, Lucas. Edward, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I want to raise the question if we really want one single blockchain for any application there is. So I doubt that this is a realistic picture. I think we will have many different blockchains which are interoperable, but which are run by associations for different use cases in this case. So
yeah, I think that's an interesting point. There's that. And I think that kind of leads into a couple of questions from this. Yes, there is the likelihood of being a number of different blockchains with these interoperable standards. And I think one of those things that would be interesting to, I know Lucas had mentioned about working with industry to create these standards.
Exactly.
I think the kind of question back to Lucas and to the panelists is to kind of what sort of fora is kind of coming downstream to be able to do that. And then the other question I have as well is how important. So Lucas, you mentioned the alliance of the EU member states, Norway and Liechtenstein, for the creation of this EU blockchain infrastructure. How important is it that it spreads wider than Europe, though, and kind of developing these standards on a global level? I appreciate there's a lot of questions there, but perhaps the kind of public-private partnership part first, and then we go into the kind of the EU global discussion.
Certainly, with pleasure. And if you allow me still to answer the question of Eduard, I think it's a good question. I hope you didn't understand my intervention as suggesting that we want to replace private blockchains with a pan-European blockchain services infrastructure. That's definitely not the case. This is a project to accelerate the take-up of blockchains in the public sector, and to use the public sector then as a trailblazer, and to explain to civil servants also why blockchain technology makes sense, because there's a lot of hesitation in the public sector to use blockchain in the first place. And that's what this project is about. The standardization is exactly to enable blockchains to speak to one another. It's one of the biggest problems we have today, is that one DLT doesn't speak to another one. We have the two big families of Ethereum and of Hyperledger, where we know that at the C level, there are meanwhile really efforts to make these two blockchain ecosystems talk to one another, but what about all the others? So we need a certain minimum set of standards, and it starts with semantics. There's so different semantics out there, and then it breaks down into technological standards. And now I'm coming to the question of Laman. I think what we are doing in particular is that we are trying to work very closely with the industry and to promote very closely with the industry those standards that we think from a European perspective allow us to deliver on the twin transition. So both on sustainability and also on technological digitalization, being ambitious on that one. These standards have not been written. They are in the process of being discussed at the level of technical experts in the standard setting bodies. We are there. We share our views and our values and our opinions. And we also try to ensure a balanced representation of European and also of extra European experts, that everybody can be heard, but we don't set them directly ourselves. What will happen with the eIDAS regulation and the electronic ledgers is that essentially the Commission defines very high level essential requirements, which are then later on broken down at the technical standardization level and made compulsory, if you want so, or recommended by the Commission regulations.
Thank you. Hermione, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to make a point in terms of interoperability, and I think, and I might have misconstrued what Lucas was saying. What you don't want is one kind of centralized system into another. Ethereum is good for something, Hyperledger is good for something. If you really want to encourage innovation in this space, you need these thousands of blockchains which are coming out. And also just in terms of standards, I think we're too early to start making standards. We're not in a mature state where we haven't seen full innovation yet, because this is only the beginning. And the problem with creating these standards is that it actually completely kills innovation, because now you have to comply with this standard or your product is not good. The explosive growth we've seen in the DLT space is because of the fact that there is no solid regulation that exists, and there is no solid standard that exists, and that enables you to have innovation. Maybe there is a point in time when this will change and will plateau at a place where not much innovation is coming through, but I think it's too early. Of course, the Commission has to stay on top of it. You have to think about standards and regulations, but I think introducing standards at this early stage is actually detrimental to innovation. And I think we have not cracked it yet, and I think there is a lot more to crack, and there's a lot more innovation which we will see over the next few years. It would be a mistake to put standards in place today unless they are very, very flexible standards.
I just to come back very quickly to Hermione, and then I would be interested to get Lucas's reply. Just to kind of link in with this decentralized marketplace from before, how does that work if these standards aren't in place? Like, how can we have that adoption if there are multiple different standards that are being adopted by different people, and we don't have that kind of standardization?
It's a two-layer problem. There is a product. We are talking about a product, and there's a standard for that product that already exists. Okay. What I'm arguing about is the standard underneath. How do you sell that product? How do you create that marketplace? That's where the innovation is happening right now. In terms of the product itself, you have plenty of standards. If it's a consumer product, for example, when you go and do a business with somebody today and you pick up the phone and have one-to-one business, what is the standard? You have contracts, but it's pretty flexible, right? You can agree anything you like with amongst people. What I mean is that if you create standards in terms of DLT that everybody has to obey that, then that has just created that burden on innovation. It's just created the burden. You without you even knowing, just the fact that you have a standard, and then you have to hire a lawyer to understand that standard so that you can actually implement that standard, and then getting a lawyer to speak to the tech team who doesn't really care about any lawyers much, and the lawyers don't think technical people much. You have this argument going on, and here we are as an innovator, somebody sitting there pulling their hair out. So I'm just telling you from practical experience what a standard would do today to innovation, because we have seen token classification, right? What we have said is, okay, there is no clear picture, but we still somehow need to regulate it. Let's talk about utility token, governance token, security token, and we go round and round it. Not that it stopped anything, everything carried on as it would have done. But what it did was it created for the innovators who want to do the right thing, it creates a huge burden. And then what you have is, okay, the lawyers' fees to understand a standard is in excess of hundreds of thousands of euros. So I'm not saying we don't need the standards. I'm just saying it's too early for the standards.
Okay, and Lucas, perhaps I'll bring you back in here.
Thank you very much. No, we certainly listen to critical views of the industry. I think this dialogue is most welcome. I think we're not talking about granular standards at the level of individual applications or use cases, or how a marketplace should look like on DLT, etc. We're talking about high-level standards at the level of DLT, because if you want to promote certain technologies in the public sector, for instance, in the procurement, what are the criteria that member states should set in order to procure reliable distributed ledger technologies? These are open questions, and they're questions that need to be answered, right? And there are other questions of interoperability. You say that we should wait with the standardization of distributed ledger technologies, and I can relate to the argument that you bring forward. If we regulate too early, it might be counterproductive. Regulating too late might also be counterproductive. So it's the right moment to choose the right moment is a good point. And perhaps we still have to wait with more granular regulation and standardization, and we rather focus now on the high-level principles. This is absolutely possible. I think we're at the beginning of a process that has started at ISO BC4EU IEEE already. The discussions there at the level of semantics now, still quite high level, but are now already starting to become more granular. We're following that, we're encouraging that. And if we see that some standards are mature enough, and we will also listen to the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications here, what they have to say about that, then I think then the moment could have come to make a standard binding. We definitely don't want to stifle innovation, and we'll be careful in avoiding that.
Lucas, if I kind of come back to that. So you'd mentioned before about the EU blockchain infrastructure that was put in place. To Humayun's point, I mean, if that is kind of put in for adoption and in itself creates a standard, is that not, that, as Humayun was saying, kind of funneling a standard to be created out of this, which then prevents innovation in the space or the ability to people come in? And kind of added to that question, what was the kind of consultation process to kind of develop that blockchain?
So the blockchain infrastructure is basically what we're building here is a general capacity which can be used and to run use cases. We have, together with the experts of the 27 EU member states, Norway and Liechtenstein, put together expert groups that are working together on developing certain general principles for a number of use cases that the member states want to develop in the public sector. One of them relates to European self-sovereign identity, for instance. Another one is to promote the uptake of verifiable credentials in the university sector. So university diplomas of students, for instance, that should go into wallets. The standards that the member states are developing here together are standards that would be used for this first set of use cases. They can be guidance, they're not compulsory. So if other solutions exist on the market, and we have very general solutions, we don't have specific standards here, we have principles. It's a principle-based standard, if you want. We call it the gold standard. Then there is no reason why they should be interoperable. We try to be as inclusive here as possible. But of course, we're also promoting solutions that are in line with basic European values. I mean, that is also clear that we're doing this project to promote, in the public sector at least, a certain standard that can generally be used. And I think I've given a few examples. I mean, we certainly are open to discuss with the industry, and we are very inclusive here in this process. So this is something that's ongoing.
Thanks, Lucas. I'm conscious we've got 15 minutes left, and I want to move on to skills and talent. But before so, did anyone have any final comments on the kind of policy and regulation standards perspective? Great. Okay. Well, yes. So I want to I think one of the things that is very important in this, and to kind of speed up that adoption, is the skills and talent and investment part of this. And we've talked about where the industry is going, but not how we're getting there. So we experienced one of these things quite, Global Digital Finance works quite closely with the Khalifa Review in the UK. And one of the chapters that was on there was on skills and talent, which focused on how to ensure that the workforce is equipped for emerging technologies, the industries and the jobs. And that's very much what Alexandra was mentioning earlier. And notwithstanding what was said in the EIB report that, that Europe has the most amount of researchers and 30% of publications in AI, I'd be interested to know, Alexandra, if we come to you first, as an academic in this space, would you say that Europe are well equipped for this? I mean, the figures seem to suggest yes, but do we need to do more in terms of developing talent?
I think we can always do more. So in terms of, I guess there are two things there. First is university education, especially towards the sort of specialization years, the final years. There needs to be a way of making the curriculum of certain subjects a bit more interdisciplinary. And, you know, we might, you know, we are seeing the convergence effect of digital technology, but that convergence effect, I think, hasn't trickled down to curriculums, which are really slow moving usually in many universities and especially traditional universities. So we are, for example, actively trying to look at our courses and incorporate. So I teach operations management, and I also luckily teach data analytics and AI. So I, for example, actively try to revise the manufacturing engineering curriculum to bring in some of that data analytics content into the way that we teach supply chains. Yes, so interdisciplinary content is important. And in various companies, particularly kind of multinational companies, we start also seeing data analytics teams emerge. And I guess over time we will, companies will decide whether a centralized data analytics team or digital team is the way to go, or do we need to have some of that capability dispersed into the different contexts? And that's just something that's going to be driven by the problems that different companies face. But I think, data science and domain knowledge go hand in hand. We can't treat these separately because if we just if we have just generic data science knowledge being applied to a problem that the data scientist doesn't know the domain, then silly things can happen. So yeah, I think it's a problem that is being addressed slowly, but we can do more.
Thank you. Humayun, if I come over to you next, kind of shifting this slightly from the kind of education but access to talent side of things, what are the kind of obstacles that you're seeing in your work here? And are there particular kind of clusters of people where you're finding this? Or?
Yeah, can I just make one point on Alexandra's comments, which I think is quite interesting, and I think it's worth raising. This is exactly the issue we are having in the domain expertise. To translate that into AI is absolutely the problem. And but if you think about technology should be built as a tool so that the domain knowledge can be deployed on this technology. Now, there is definitely some merit in actually having overlapping courses in terms of AI and your domain-specific subjects. But what is also quite important, and we should encourage that in terms of where we're going in terms of development, is to make machine learning and AI a commodity rather than this speciality. When you want to do an Excel spreadsheet, you don't go and start learning how to build an Excel spreadsheet. So the problem at the moment why this isn't happening is these bigger corporates are just holding on to it. And because that's giving them this edge. And that ties in very nicely with the skill set you're talking about, which is, no, it's not easy to find the skill set. It's very difficult. You have these big corporates paying extortionate amounts of money because they want to maintain the monopoly. And they are very easily maintaining that monopoly because they have huge amounts of money. Now, it's not the fault of the individual who goes to work for them. And I keep coming back to it. It's all about the economics of it. If they can't make money without the job, they will choose the job. Now, if you give them an alternative where you have this open system where they can actually take the domain expertise, they can take machine learning expertise, they can actually participate in this ecosystem and get paid and make money, then you will see a lot better flow going to these technologies. At the moment, people who have money are the ones who are taking them away. I mean, as soon as big corporates decided to come into blockchain and AI, they will wipe out the whole space. I mean, they already have. I mean, you don't really get that many candidates unless you start paying extortionate amounts of money. And if you're a startup who's trying to innovate, it's never going to be easy. So yes, all these numbers say something else, but I'm telling you from my personal experience, and I've said it many a times since last 2 years, we are not doing enough to give smaller companies the opportunity to innovate. We're handing it over to the big corporations, the Googles, the Facebooks of this world, and they are taking it. And we are going to come to this point where you just will not be able to find the right people to do this job. So I think I have a completely conflicting view to that report.
Thank you. Edward, you had your hand up, if I come over to you.
Yeah, maybe I could add here. So I'm a lecturer here at the Corporate State University too. And yeah, regarding blockchain and knowledge there's an interesting thing happening, what I recognize in my classes. So 5 years ago, when I started to teach about blockchain, nobody ever heard about it. There were some students knowing what this is, but the vast majority didn't know about this technology. And what I've seen in the last 2 semesters is that there are more and more people engaging with technology privately, so because they find interest in it. But nevertheless, we need to add this to our curricula, as Alexandra told. And yeah, so there is hope, I think.
Absolutely. Well, kind of also kind of pulling at the point, Humayun, you were making about more needing to be done to smaller companies. The report also had mentioned that there was a 10 million a year deficit in investment into AI, and that this was actually focused more not at the kind of seed capital, but later stage funding. I mean, would you agree with that? Is that kind of the point that you were making as well, that yes, towards smaller companies, but not necessarily just startups, but allowing them to scale up and become kind of bring in the kind of talent, not just hiring 1 or 2 people, but a larger workforce?
Yeah, I think we are, okay. I mean, there's very good points, but if we just talked about all the good we have done, will never improve. So I'm not going to focus on the good we have done. We have plenty of good things to talk about. What I'm talking about is what needs to be improved. So I think we all know on this panel how rubbish we are in Europe, UK to scale. We don't scale. Why? Why don't we scale? I'm telling you this from past experience as well. Somebody from US has to come and put the money in. You can't get money in the UK and Europe for scale. Why? Because we're risk averse. We don't like risk. We don't want to scale because big is not so good. Let's not go big so quickly because, let's do it slowly. Well, let's not, because if you're going to do it slowly, you're not going to do it at all because somebody else is going to come and do it for you. So that's and that relates to that 10 million deficit, but I think that number, probably could be 10 times more. So, or maybe even more. So, but I mean, let's not even talk about the real, true kind of really startups. Yes, that's another big problem. So now on one side, we're not doing anything while these big corporates are taking away all the talent, but finding money for the seed is a nightmare. Well, why do you need? I mean, you try and do a grant to EC or in the UK. Well, first, I mean, there is a problem. The problem is you're asking people, and I'm going to focus on distributed ledger technology and AI. You're asking people to create this ecosystem where transactions happen on the ledger, and they're microtransactions, and they're going to be done on tokenized format. And then here you are trying to raise money, writing 35 pages for a grant where they want you to show, money in the bank, right? So they can give you 40% of what 60% that you have in the bank. And if you have it in tokenized form, well, nobody acknowledges that tokenized form because we don't believe tokens are real money yet. So I think that has to start right from the bottom. And I'm telling you this from personal and other experience. I mean, I've seen that. So you can't use, for example, BTC or Ethereum or USDT, which is a stable coin, as collateral. But why? Because it's not seen as such. So I think that mentality has to change. And then on top of that, you have a lot of money floating in the, and I know this word people find very difficult to swallow, crypto world. There is a lot of money floating around, and you could raise a lot of money. But then if you want to do it in a proper manner, the regulation kills that because you're done. So you can't get it that way. If you're setting up a genuine company which needs to raise money, you can't be in DLT or AI because you're looking at microtransactions, you're looking at developing technology in this space. But these are some very basic hurdles which we need to do. In terms of seed, I mean, it's really risk averse. I mean, even the governments are not even putting enough money in the development of innovation. They're just not doing it. So scale we can't do, innovation we can't do. So where is this all going? If we're not careful, is either in the US or in Asia. And I'm not making this up. You can look at the numbers, and that's where it's going. So, we are behind. We are way behind. We need to really up the game. So, yeah, that's where I'll probably end my rant.
Thank you very much. I think that's a fantastic point at which we pass over to Lucas for any kind of final comments on what the Commission are doing in this area, and perhaps a response to some of the points that were raised here.
I can very much relate to what has been said, and it's good to hear what you call ranting, Humayun. I think it's a very valid point. The difficulty to scale in Europe is an established fact. I think let's not try to improve. Let's not try to talk it away. It's there. It's a difficulty. It's related to mentality, as you say. There's only so much we can change as European Commission about that. We can encourage investments. We can't do them ourselves. I can say one thing about that. What we are doing about skills, first of all, well, we are trying to put money on the table to improve the capacity of academics and of universities to bring blockchain and AI into the curricula. If you look at the SHARES program, for instance, that we have launched quite recently, and which is funded from Erasmus Plus, it has quite a substantial budget. We are looking to build up educational programs at universities that can offer AI and blockchain training courses. And we have, under the SHARES program, also published a matchmaking platform that matches startups looking for talent in AI and blockchain on the one hand with students that have these capabilities, have learned about these universities on the other hand. So we've created a kind of matching platform. These are the things we can do. We can try to support this academic curricula a bit and try to match and overcome the gap. I should also refer to the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe program, which, as you know, pays out grants and does calls for startups at the seed stage. So in total, we have spent around 190 million euros in the last financing period for blockchain seed companies that were developing blockchain technology. 190 million. It's not nothing. It's perhaps compared to the money that is being spent in the UAE from private pockets, still less. But considering that it's taxpayers' money, I think it's quite a substantial sum that we've spent and will continue spending another Horizon Europe, which will be adopted in June, still the work program. And we also support, of course, digital innovation through prizes. If you look at what your European Innovation Council does, who has just handed out a 5 million euros prize for blockchain in social good. So there are a number of things we can do. As you rightly say, one of the big challenges we face in Europe is the risk averseness. And the risk averseness is not just one in the public sector, it's one in the corporate sector as well at the C-level. We hear often that very successful pilots that are being developed within large corporations for blockchain and AI are not then put into practice because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 risk considerations that stop the successful pilot at that stage, which we find very frustrating from the Commission perspective, having co-funded these pilots, but then at the end of the day, they don't take the next step. So willing to work with you, willing to work with the industry to overcome this big gap, this risk aversions. We're going to put some money on the table to the extent that we have it, and we'll continue promoting skills at universities to help create a new workforce of talented AI and blockchain experts that can also start with startups.
Thank you, Lucas. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for in this session. It seems that hour and 15 minutes absolutely flew by. I mean, it was a fascinating discussion, and I hope those who are watching or enjoyed it as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of these developments and kind of initiatives that we discussed today come into fruition. So thank you very much to all the panelists, Alexandra, Eduard, Humayun, and Lucas, and for taking part in the discussion. Thank you to the audience members for listening. Robert, it's your time to cast a vote as to whether this is blockbuster worthy. And for the rest of you, I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. I will now pass over to the next panel on social impact and blockchain. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.